but I don't want to. That's what kids do. No big deal. Yesterday I was speaking with Sean and I said, look, today's passage is about when the chickens come home to roost. And then as I was thinking about things this morning, I looked on YouTube and I typed in 1 Samuel chapter 29 and there was a sermon there. And so I clicked on it and the guy said, this is about where the chickens come home to roost. And I watched about 5 minutes and it was like, oh, I can't watch this anymore. He had it all convoluted. You know, it's like Maurice McCarthy used to say, never let a passage get in the way with what you're trying to say. And I don't like to do that. I like to give it as it is. And so we're going to try today, since Tally isn't here, there we go. Are we recording the video? Okay, good. Nice to see you all. We are using things off the internet, and they are mostly from free images, but if we couldn't find a free image, we just took one down, and we're using it for educational purposes only. And so some of the copyrights are up here. Go ahead, please. 1 Samuel chapter 29. Go ahead. So I've entitled this, David's Deceit Does Him Dirty. Now, let me just review briefly where David finds himself in this section of the scriptures. He has been chased around for a long time by Saul, so finally he decides that he will go into Philistia and he will seek asylum there. He goes to the king of Gath, makes a friendship with him, and then the king of Gath gives him the city of Ziklag, which is in the south. And during that time, David goes on raids, and he raids the Amalekites and the different people there in the south, and he brings the booty back, and he pays a percentage of it to the king of Gath. So the king of Gath really likes him because he's bringing in all kinds of income, you know, just like a mafioso. He gives the money up. And so the king of Gath, Achish, likes him, and he calls him from Ziklag up to Gath, and he says, from now on, you're going to be my personal bodyguard. Which is, you know, a great honor, I guess. He was basically that under Saul until Saul chased him away. But now it comes the point where the king of Gath is in a deal with the other four Philistine kings from the main cities of Philistia, and they decide that they're going to go and fight with Saul. And so David is in a predicament at that time because it's not going to look good if he's a mercenary in the Philistine army coming to fight against Saul. And David has several times avoided confronting Saul. On 2 occasions he has had the opportunity to kill Saul but did not do it. And so now he finds himself in a political situation, a no-win situation, where the king of Gath says, you have to go with me to fight against Israel. So that's where we find ourselves today. Go ahead, please. The Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek. Now this place, you can go there. There's not much there today. But in these days, it is, in fact, there is still a, I don't know if this is even working. There is a fortress on the top of the hill there. And I'm going to show you on the map where this is and kind of give you an idea. Those of you who are watching at home are going to see better pictures than what we're seeing here because it's just not as bright. So the Philistines gathered their forces there. Go ahead, please. And the Israelites were encamped by the fountain that is in Jezreel. Now here's a fortress in Jezreel, and it tells us that there was a fountain there. You can actually go there. There's a big sign on it where this place actually is, and there's a mountain there at the place, and at the bottom of the mountain there's this huge cave, and the spring comes up out of the bottom of the mountain and turns into a stream. So they had plenty of water. They're in a place, and the Philistines are in the process of invading. This is not a border war anymore. They're actually coming in to the land of Israel and deciding to put an end to Saul. Go ahead, please. Can you see that? It's hard to see we don't have enough lumens. Down here we have the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem is here, and Gath is here. Ziklag is way down here. And so they come together, and they're here at Aphek, and then they're on their way up here. Now I'd like to just mention that this particular event occurs before the event of last week. Because last week we talked about the armies were very close together, and Saul goes, up to Endor and meets the medium and everything. And so that event happened after this. But in the scriptures, it's before, because it goes Saul, David, Saul, David. The stories go back and forth, and it's almost like in the meantime. So we're a little bit back in history here, and so they're getting ready to go up this plain, the Philistine plain, the Palestine plain, and go up here, and they're going to camp here, and Jezreel is right there. So they're very close together, but they haven't gotten up there yet. Go ahead, please. And the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. So the idea of military parades to strut yourself like a peacock are as ancient as 1200 years BC, and it probably happened even before that. And so they're giving this big show, and it's almost like, have you ever been to like Walmart in the morning when they gather all the people together, and then they all have to sing a song, and they think that what do they think? It's going to good morale or something. Be happy to work for slave wages. So they're all strutting themselves, and it's all five kings of the Philistines. And in the back, the last group is the king of Gath, and with the king of Gath is David and his 300 men. Now, could this be a problem? Go ahead, please. And the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing?" Now, something I learned in this study, which I never knew before, is that almost always when it mentions Hebrews, it's in the mouth of other people. It's in the mouth of the Egyptians. It's in the mouth of the Canaanites. It's in the mouth of the Philistines. And when the Israelites speak of themselves, they call themselves Israel. And so this Heber was a fellow who was an ancestor of Abraham, so the name had stuck in the Middle East for centuries. And they were called Hebrews, and they called themselves Israelites. There's no extra charge for that. It's something that I learned. And then, of course, the language became the Hebrew language. Achish said to the commanders, "This is not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who's been with me for days and years. Since he deserted to me, I found no fault in him to this day. Now, is this true? Is not David lying to this guy right along? He's left Saul. He's gone into this area. He's been given the city of Ziklag, and he's fighting the Amalekites and the different people that live in the south. And he has really no intention to be involved with the Philistines. He has a prophetic anointing on his life to be the king of Israel. And he's pretending. And this isn't the first time he pretended. When he was a younger man, he escaped to this Achish, and it probably it might not be the same man. It might be somebody, that might be the position, like Herod. There's 3 Herods in the New Testament. And so he's fooled this guy. He's a deceiver. You know what a deceiver is in the Bible? And the word devil means deceiver. He's a devil in the life of this king. He's a deceiver. He's a liar. He's trying to, we can justify and say, well, but maybe it's all right because, he's trying to save his own skin, which is the reason that the Bible tells us that he went there to begin with. It's a bad thing when your enemies are a safer place than your friends. And that's where he found himself in Palestine, in the land of the Philistines. So they said, is this not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who's been with me for days and years? Now this, when it says days and years, it means for this indeterminate period of time. I don't know how long he's been there. Priscilla, when people ask you when something happened in your life, can you remember anymore? It's like, I'll say to people, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, and then somebody will say, no, it was like 15. Or I think it was a couple years ago. No, it was like 10. But we know that David had been there for about a year and a half, because the scripture tells us earlier that that's how long he was there. But he gives an indeterminate amount of time. He says, David's good. He deserted to me. He doesn't like Saul. Saul's been chasing him all around. And he certainly would be a good asset in this war because he's an enemy with Saul now, and he should come along with us. And cooler heads prevailed. And the lords of the Philistines says, there's no way we're taking this guy with us because it's not wise. Oh, tried to click it. Go ahead. Israeli mercenaries had defected previously. Chapter 14, we see this. This is the story where Jonathan sneaks up this mountainside with his armor bearer and kills a bunch of people on the top of the mountain, and they think that all the Israelites have come up and they all scatter, and there were mercenaries that were Israeli mercenaries that were working for the Philistines. And when Jonathan went up and all the people started to scatter, there were people that were hiding there that were Israelites, and they came out of the caves, and the mercenaries that they were paying turned on the Philistines and fought for Israel. So this had already occurred in history, and some people don't forget history, you know that? Some people have no idea what history is, and other people don't forget what happened. And these commanders did not forget what happened years and years and years earlier. And they said, you can't trust these Jews. You can't trust these Israelites. If we take these people with us in the middle of the battle, they're in the back of our army, and we'll come against Saul, and he'll be fighting us here, and they'll be fighting us in the back. And makes sense, doesn't it? Now we have to wonder, if indeed this was in David's mind. And we're left to wonder. It doesn't tell us. Go ahead, please. The commanders of the Philistines were angry. And they said, "Send this man back so that he may return to the place that you've assigned to him," which was Ziklag. "He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in the battle. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of these men?" It was a justifiable position to take. Don't you think so? Well, let's look at this word adversary. Click it once more, please. Oh, I can't even read it. I'll tell you what it says. It's translated adversary a few times, but mostly it's translated Satan. He will be a Satan to us. This is why, the word Satan literally means adversary, and this is why God can be Satan to somebody. Because if God gets to the place where he becomes your adversary, which is what has happened to Saul, God has become Saul's adversary. And we're right on the cusp of Saul getting his comeuppance. When this battle is over, Saul will be no more. Just spoiler alert. So the liar is the devil and the adversary is Satan. And it's not that I don't believe in the, evil being. It's not, but anybody can be a Satan to somebody if they're going to be their adversary. So these people were afraid that David would turn on them in order to make Saul happy, and they would end up being dead, and David would be reconciled to Saul, and then his army will be with Saul's army, and they'll be even stronger. And so then they'll lose their family, they'll lose their lives, they'll lose their property, and so forth. And so they prevailed. What is the lesson that we can learn in this? You can't trust politicians. You don't really know what people's motives are. What was Achish's motive? He's giving me money, he's protecting the southern border, and he's helpful, he's propping me up, he's saying nice things to me, and I trust him. What was David's motive? To escape from Saul and be safe. To have a safe place for his family. And David he has this fellow totally deceived. I've been deceived by people many times. Haven't you? They say one thing, and then next thing you know, you find out what they're really about. And I'm sure that they tried to argue with this king of Gath and say, this guy he's not good for us. How could you be so stupid? Next slide. And now they said the same thing. Achish says, "Is this not David, the one who defected from Saul?" And then the Philistines said, "Is this not David who they sang? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s." Might not be a good idea to have a song about, how great you are when you've defected to a country next door. But you can't get away. It's reputation in both cases, but it's a different interpretation of the reputation of David. Achish thinks that David's all there for him, and David has other aspirations because years ago Samuel laid his hands on him and anointed him king. Now I want you to understand that all this time has passed and David hasn't become king. And even after the death of Saul, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks, even after that, David doesn't become king. He only becomes king of the tribe of Judah, and so one tribe makes him king, but the other 11 tribes do not for 7 years. So the time from, oh, you're going to be king until he becomes king is a huge period of time. And it's filled with struggles, and it's filled with problems. Kind of like life, isn't it? Oh, we're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion, the great city of the King. Well, we got problems and sickness and issues. It doesn't become all beautiful on day one. It takes time, and in the end, every tear will be wiped away from our eyes. However, till we get there, there's struggles and issues, and I can't think of anybody that I know that's had more issues up to this point, even with David. Can you? I mean, a lesser man would have crumbled long before this. Go ahead, please. Achish called David and said, "As the Lord lives." Well, this is unusual. A Philistine king who worships Dagon. Remember Dagon from the earlier sermons in this series? They stole the ark and they brought it for Dagon, and in the morning the Dagon had fallen, and then the second day broke his head off. And yet somehow, in speaking to David, he says, "As the Lord lives." Now, maybe he's just trying to speak Christianese to David. Maybe he just knows that this would be the way. Yeah, he's heard the Jewish people say, "As the Lord lives," when they give their oath before. And so he just decides to say, "Well, as the Lord lives." And you know, in those days, the Philistines thought that their God was God over their territory, and that Yahweh was God over the Israelite territory. And so it seems odd that he makes this oath. "You have been honest to me." He hadn't been. He had been dishonest, but he appeared to be honest. Is there any correlation in the 21st century? He has a facade. He has a persona. Now, deep down inside, he's a good guy. And God likes him a lot. But he's got issues. Is there anybody that doesn't have issues? Let's be honest about it. I'm going to go over on this side. There's more people to annoy over here. You've been honest. You've done right. No, I've lied to you, and I haven't actually been fighting Israel. I've been fighting the Amalekites, and I've been bribing you with the money, and I'm protecting my family down here in Ziklag, and as soon as Saul's gone, it's going to be a different story, because he knows that he's going to be king of Israel, because Samuel laid his hands on him, and he received the Holy Spirit and the anointing to be king. I think he left that out in his discussions with the king of Gath. What do you think? You've done nothing wrong. I found nothing wrong from the day of your coming until today. Nevertheless, the Lords don't approve of you. Don't blame me. It's a political expediency, and they don't want you there, and so we got to let you go. Or as my mother would say, we have to let you go. She didn't like that gotta thing. Go ahead, please. So go back now and go peacefully. Do nothing to displease the lords of the Philistines. Don't cause me any problem here. I got enough problems. Just go. I don't need your services anymore. Just go quietly. Don't complain about it. Just go back. Okay. Next slide. And David said to Achish, "What have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I should not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Now, we are not told if there's two options here. One option is that David continues his subterfuge and still pretends that he's the good guy, and God is making a way for him to get out of going to Israel and fight. Or, and we're not told, or he wants to go and fight Saul at this point. You know, just because he decided not to kill him before doesn't mean that he doesn't want to kill him now. I don't know what the answer is, and it doesn't tell us, but there's two possibilities here, and the scriptures are unclear. What do you think of that? You think he was going to betray the Philistines? He might be seeing an opportunity. Yeah, that's the other option. It's possible he says to himself, well, you know, I can't kill Saul. He's the Lord's anointed, and so this is God's getting me out of this predicament. How did all this start? The Philistine chapter. It started with a lie. And it continued with lies. So we don't know. What would you do? You'd betray them, wouldn't you, Caleb? You'd get in the back and chase them forward. And then everything would be cool. The war would be over and the war would be won. And Saul would completely repent for everything that he's done previously, just like the other lords of the Philistines said would happen. We don't know. The Bible doesn't give too many what ifs. And we can never really know what we would do until we're given the opportunity or the temptation to do something. If it's a temptation, if we fall to the temptation, we fail to appreciate what the consequences of the temptation will be. I couldn't hear a word you said with that mask, but maybe they'll give you a mic.
You could be waiting for a critical time in the battle to take the day itself.
One more time, so we can get it for the people that are watching.
He could be waiting for a critical time in the battle to take the day himself and win everything in one shot.
It's likely, really. In one sense, it's likely. Would he be justified to do that? I mean, right. So they were smart not to allow this, weren't they? Microphone, please. We have people online.
Thank you. Is it possible, too, some of those kings were aware of previously hiring those mercenaries and knew?
I'm sure of it. They
and they're
were
like, yeah, get them out of here.
This has been a problem before.
Yeah, they studied history.
Mhm. Thank you. Anyone else?
So remember how it mentioned that David had gone and killed, everyone when he would raid these villages. He, it points why he killed everyone, because he's got this act going on, and if he lets one person survive, they're going to snitch on him and tell what he's been doing.
They're going to be a rat.
Well, they're going to tell. I don't know if it's really a rat if somebody's killing you in your entire city. But I imagine that rumors must have gotten through that David had been doing things like that, and the Philistine kings had heard about it. And I don't know if anybody's read the Iliad, but you have all these Greek kings together, and they're all going up against Troy, and you just picture them all there. They're all their own kings, and they all have their own men and everything like that. And
well, that's the way it was here, too.
Yeah, that's the way it is here. That's why I picture it. But when we're fighting a group together, we're all on the same side, but they all have their own little quarrels, and one year they might be fighting each other, but right now they're going against Saul, and there's this tiny little king, and you're happy to have him, but you find out that David is there with him. They still want the king and his support, because he's got 1/10 of the army there, but put him somewhere
there were
where
five kings,
put him somewhere where he can't do any harm.
which is at Ziklag. The battle is going to be up near Nazareth, and Ziklag is the furthest most south on the east coast. He's going to be, they're starting here, they're going here, but they send him back here. So he is absolutely on the other side of the country.
The fact that we know behind the scenes that David was attacking them secretly tells me that, he was going to continue doing that. If we didn't have that, I'd say, who knows? But that seems like pretty good evidence in court.
Look at what we do and not what we say. When Aretha gets back there, she can move the slide up. She's got double duty today. Achish replied to David, I know you're blameless in my sight and an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up to the battle. Next slide. Now then, rise in the morning, you and your servants of your Lord who came with you, and go to the place I appointed for you. As for the evil report, do not take it to heart, for you have done very well before me. Start early in the morning and leave as soon as you have light. So the armies march north, David marches south. Which is really good later on, when the report of what happens, hey, I wasn't even there. I was in Ziklag. I have proof. Let me see the next slide, please. David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went to Jezreel. And one more slide. That's it. I thought I had a slide that said something like this. What happens when you leave a city completely undefended? And your wife and your kids are there. And there's no military, there's no police presence. What happens in a case like that? So David has a huge problem that he doesn't even know about yet. And he's directed back there by the voice of the Philistine kings. And when he gets back, what does he find? The Amalekites have gotten revenge, and they have taken all the people, all the women and children of David's army to be slaves. And they burned the city to the ground. Stay tuned next week. Okay, now we'll take any more comments you have on this passage. What is there in this for us? I don't have the slightest idea. I know. Your lies will come back to haunt you. But if he didn't lie, what would have happened? If he stayed in Israel and let Saul continue to chase him, then if he stayed in southern Israel, then Saul wouldn't have been in northern Israel. So it's a what if situation. I think it shows human nature. It's like the devil said about Job, skin for skin, man will do anything to save his skin. Deceit is not a good thing, and we might say, if David had just had faith and didn't think that Saul was going to kill him and he didn't go there, none of this would have happened. Maybe. I don't know. It doesn't give us the answers. What if I hadn't done this when I was younger? What would my life be? People think about that, don't they? Well, I think that the lesson in this is that God protected David even though he did some really stupid stuff. And he was dismissed from where he was with Achish at the exact right time where he could go back and take care of his family. And if you look at what God says about David, over the course of his life, he had way better morality than those people who were around him. And God is able to forgive whatever it is that we do if we come to him and if we admit that we've made a mistake. And you look at the Psalms that David wrote, which is many of them, and many of them are about the mistakes that he has made, and he pleads for the mercy of God. And so it's an example to us when we screw up, just turn from it and ask for mercy, and he grants mercy. Anyone else? Okay, goodbye everybody online, and we're going to take communion.